Okay, now we're gonna move on. And I keep forgetting to ask because it's not our usual meeting setting. We didn't have any public comments on any of these items, correct, Nathan?
No, we have not. We do have one public comment for this item, however, so we can read that at the end.
Okay, so right now, yes, we're gonna move on to item number 6, traffic calming on College Boulevard. And I'm gonna let staff take over. Okay, who's making the presentation? I believe is Elliot.
Excuse me. Yeah, I'm making the presentation. My name is Tom Frank, and I'm your transportation director. And with me today is John Kim, the city's traffic engineer. And I'm going to turn it over to John to begin the presentation.
Okay, great.
Next slide. Thank you, Tom. Good evening, Chair and Vice Chair and Commissioners. Next slide. We were trying to work out the kinks earlier. I think might take a while for him to figure out how to advance the slide. But once we do, we should be rolling. You can try a right click and advance it that way if you've got your cursor on it.
Yeah, John, it's not my PowerPoint's frozen. So do you want to, I'll relinquish the screen and maybe you could take the screen.
One second. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, so can we see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So continuing on, a little bit of background. On June 11th of 2019, City Council requested staff to bring back an analysis of traffic calming on 3 roadway segments. Those were College Boulevard from Carlsbad Village Drive down to Sage Creek High School, which is Cannon Road, Tamarack Avenue from Skyline Road to Carlsbad Boulevard, and then finally Carlsbad Boulevard from Agua Hedionda Lagoon Trailhead to State Street. On September 24th of 2019, City Council requested staff to bring back traffic calming options and analysis for College Boulevard from Carlsbad Village Drive to Cannon Road. They wanted to see a little bit more analysis, including unintended consequences for any proposed physical changes to this roadway. A little reminder of how traffic calming is performed most commonly in Carlsbad. The Carlsbad Residential Traffic Management Program provides traffic calming to residential streets where the prevailing speeds may be higher or significantly higher than the 25 miles per hour that is posted on a residential street. Residential streets are posted at 25 with no speed survey required. So based on the California Vehicle Code and the California MUTCD, we can post it without having a speed survey. All other streets in Carlsbad have speed limits that must be within 5 miles per hour of the prevailing speeds per the California Vehicle Code and the California MUTCD. That's California law, and that's how we establish speed limits in Carlsbad. College Boulevard is not a residential street as defined in the Carlsbad Residential Traffic Management Program, so we can't consider traffic calming under this program. So therefore, we have to develop some unique strategies and we like to base that on recommendations that are found in the mobility element. Some specific background on College Boulevard itself. College Boulevard was built to major arterial standards per the old circulation element of the previous general plan. It's posted right now at 45 miles per hour per a valid engineering and traffic survey, which has a speed survey as described before. There are 2 vehicle lanes and a bicycle lane in each direction on College Boulevard. They're separated by a raised median, and there are sidewalks provided on both sides of the street. Traffic signals provide the traffic control at the major intersections on this roadway. A little bit of collision data just to give the commissioners a point of reference. We looked at collision data for the calendar year 2019. In 2019, there were 4 collisions between Carlsbad Village Drive and Cannon Road, which is the original segment in question. There was 1 collision on College between CVD and North City Limits, so north of Carlsbad Village Drive. All of these accidents in 2019 were property damage only, no injuries, and none of them involved a pedestrian or bicycle. The number of collisions isn't always a good comparative statistic. Collision rate takes into consideration length of the roadway, volume of vehicles upon it. So that's maybe a better value or figure to look at when looking at collisions. The collision rate in 2019 for College Boulevard is 0.33 collisions per million vehicle miles. The state of California, Caltrans, publishes collision rates for its facilities, and looking at a comparative state of California rate, a 4-lane divided highway in an urban setting, their state rate for such a roadway is 1.43 collisions per million vehicle miles. And that comes from 2016 Caltrans, and that's the most recent collision data that's available from the state. So you can see that the collision rate compares favorably to what's happening overall in the state. Based on a memo or email from Commissioner Linke, he wanted to have some additional information. I didn't have time to maybe answer all of his questions, but I did expand the collision data to include multiple years. So we did a query not only for 2019, but we went 5 years back. So for 2015 to the present, for every year, we looked at the number of collisions and calculated the collision rate. And this table just shows you that the collision rate varies from, looks like a low of 0.32 collisions per million vehicle miles up to 1.32 collisions per million vehicle miles, all under the state average of 1.43. This is just an expansion of the collision data that we presented. He also, Commissioner Linke also asked, is there a graphical representation? I didn't provide it. We didn't do it for the staff report, but we do have the capability to do that. This graphic here shows where each of the collisions in each calendar year occurred. You can see that they're mostly at the intersections. In 2016, there was 4 of them north of Carlsbad Village Drive, but that pattern didn't seem to repeat itself. So we consider this fairly random and not a clustering of collisions that would lead us to further investigations in terms of collision density. There's some traffic safety improvements that we've implemented on College Boulevard that I just wanted to remind the commissioners of. There was an additional signal indication that was added to the traffic signal at College Boulevard and Richfield. We had some concerns about vehicles running red lights. We looked at it. We saw that the signal going northbound was on a curve, and a high mount far left indication would give motorists going northbound more advanced warning of the signal. So we added that to the signal there. We've deployed temporary speed feedback signs on College based on speeding concerns in the area. We've implemented adult crossing guards. We did an analysis which included traffic counts, pedestrian counts. And based on that analysis, we recommended to the police department that adult crossing guards be implemented at 2 intersections, College and Tamarack North, and also College and Tamarack South. These provide supervised pedestrian crossings for school children. At these same 2 intersections, we've also implemented what's known as a leading pedestrian interval, which means that the pedestrians would get a walk indication while all the other vehicle movements had a red, so that they would get a advanced start into the intersection without any vehicle conflicts, and it gives them a little bit more visibility when we do this. Some of the improvements include working with the public outreach. In January 27th of this year, we had a meeting with residents to concern specifically about College Boulevard north of Carlsbad Village Drive, mostly in the vicinity of Calavera Hills Elementary and Middle Schools. At this meeting, some action items were identified. We identified that turning vehicles yield to pedestrian signage would be beneficial. Since that meeting, we've issued work orders and those signs have been installed. We were asked to consider no right turn on red signs at the intersection of College Boulevard and Tamarack. Based on the impacts that it would have, we're doing the studies right now. So we didn't issue a work order, but once we finish those studies, we'll consider whether or not no right turn on red would be beneficial. And we were also asked to expand the scope of any College Boulevard traffic calming discussion to include that portion between Carlsbad Village Drive and North City limits. And therefore, that's why we're talking about that segment as well in today's report. Like I mentioned, our recommendations should be aligned with the mobility element. College Boulevard is classified as an arterial street typology in the general plan mobility element. As such, the mobility element recommends that vertical traffic calming techniques such as speed tables, humps, bumps, etc., should not be considered. But it also allows what they say is special considerations to be considered within proximity to schools. And obviously there's a high school on the south end, and then Calavera Hills and elementary and middle schools on the north end. There are some specific mobility element policies that speak to complete streets and what we could consider in terms of traffic calming. I won't read these out loud, but you can refer to the mobility element for some specific guidance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom to continue the discussion. Is
Tom, you're muted.
He is muted.
Excuse me. Thank you, John. Before I get into presenting the 6 options that are included in your staff report and shown in Exhibit 2, I wanted to give you a highlight several key issues associated with managing traffic along city arterial networks. On your screen in front of you is, of course, Google Maps, which shows you the arterial freeway system and our parts of the arterial network. The regional adjacent freeway traffic conditions have a major influence on traffic volume and congestion on the adjacent local arterials, while the widening on I-5 currently underway from Manchester and Encinitas up to State Route 78 is scheduled to be complete sometime in 2022. These improvements will not alleviate the morning and afternoon rush hour peak traffic volumes on College Boulevard. Considering the SR 78 and I-5 interchange improvements are not scheduled to be improved in the foreseeable future. Congestion pressures on College Boulevard during the peak periods are likely to return post-COVID-19 to the prior levels that we saw prior to COVID-19. Next slide, John. We present 6 options in attachment 2. Some are less feasible than others, and some were included to address suggestions received by the community and just to also address options that we thought may come up during questions. Traffic congestion tends to maintain equilibrium. Increase in capacity of these corridor routes through the city will likely further increase traffic volume on local streets when the adjacent freeway is congested. Likewise, a reduction in the roadway capacity will redistribute the displaced vehicles to an alternate route. Next slide. So getting into the specific options, I'll turn this one over to Mr. Kim.
Okay, since I presented originally this recommendation, I wanted to go over option 1. Option 1 is speed feedback signs. This was what was recommended originally to our city council upon request. And we still feel like this is a good feature to implement given the concerns on College Boulevard. We do want to expand the scope to include College Boulevard north of Carlsbad Village Drive. So we would recommend speed feedback signs pretty much on the whole length of College, from Sage Creek, Cannon Road to the south, all the way to north city limits. We do want to add that these speed feedback signs, we are working on the capability to provide speed data from speed feedback signs directly to our traffic management center. This is something that we currently don't have right now. But when the permanent speed feedback signs, if approved by council, were to be installed on College Boulevard, we'd be able to provide speed data to our police department so that they could provide focused enforcement based on actual speeding behavior. And we believe that this will make the speed feedback signs more effective. Due to the expansion of the scope, we estimate 9 to 11 speed feedback signs. The exact number would be finalized during the design phase. This is a graphic showing where the speed feedback signs could be located. Essentially, they are in advance of the major intersections. We have 9 shown here, but based on topography, other conditions that we would look at in the design phase, we would finalize that number, like I said, between 9 and 11 speed feedback signs. For the other options, I'm going to turn it back over to the transportation, Tom Frank.
Great, thank you, John. So option 2 is a redesign of the street segment with a lower design speed, and the advantages are shown on the slide in front of you. This option would keep the existing traffic signals and the existing travel lanes. The design would reduce the travel lane widths and tighten the radii, including the corner radii, and see if we could get some vertical deflection with the revised design, and then also shorten the pedestrian crossings. Next slide. However, the disadvantages include the cost, and the exhibit 2 that's in your staff report has the approximate cost range, and these are just really high level magnitude cost range based on other improvements that have been constructed in a similar scope. So the cost for this option was $4 to $6 million. There'd be a potential reduced capacity of the road segment, And along with any physical change that would be made to the corridor, besides option 1, any physical change to the road corridor, we would want to do a very extensive public outreach program to make sure that the project is fully meeting the expectations of the surrounding community. So it would be a very timely process or time-consuming process. Some of the unintended consequences include potentially increasing travel times, and by increasing the travel times, it would also potentially redirect traffic to other routes. Next slide. Option 3 is a single lane roundabout, and the advantages include intersection safety and efficiency improvements at the intersection control itself. And with this option, it also enables the potential for a road diet. Next slide. And slide in front of you is actually an aerial view of Camino del Rio, which is in the city of San Clemente. And this roadway was a part, or actually it's just to the west of a gap closure project. And it was part of the gap closure project for Avenida La Plata and the Camino del Rio extensions. And because of the possible concerns over increased traffic along this roadway, the existing 4-lane roadway went through the public process, and the community elected to implement roundabouts along with this road diet to address the traffic concerns. Next slide. However, the disadvantages again include a really high cost. As you can see, this option is in the $6 to $8 million range. There's a potential to reduce capacity. For roundabouts, many times you have to obtain additional easements along the corners. And again, it would be a timely process to go through all of the extensive public outreach which would be needed. The unintended consequences include potentially redirecting traffic to other routes, increasing travel times, and with a dramatic change, it would likely entail revising the growth management plan. Next slide. The fourth option is a 2-lane roundabout option, and the advantages include intersection safety and efficiency improvements, and it would maintain the existing travel lane configurations. However, there are many disadvantages. And next slide, John. The disadvantages include a very, very high cost. And for 2-lane roundabouts, they typically are in the range of 150 to 200 foot diameter area. So a very large area. So with that, we would likely, it would prove to be unfeasible because of the needed right of way and the potential property acquisition, which would be needed for this option. In addition to that, it would require an extensive public outreach effort again. And the unintentional consequence is by implementing the 2-lane roundabout option, you would actually increase the potential capacity of that corridor. By doing that, you can actually potentially create congestion points on the same corridor or other corridors in the city. Next slide. So option number 5 is vertical deflections, which include speed tables at the intersections and speed cushions along the segment. And as John mentioned, typically the general plan actually lists in there that this isn't the preference along arterial segments, but there is a special condition near schools. There's several reasons that this is part of the reason why we don't actually recommend this option. But the improvements or the advantages include improving safety through speed reduction, and it does maintain the existing travel lanes. Next slide. The disadvantages include additional slowing and accelerating along the segment. So there'd be continually slowing for the speed table or cushion, and then speeding up, and then slowing again and speeding up. And that in itself creates environmental concerns, which use more fuel use, and the emissions and greenhouse gases potentially go up. In addition, this would require an extensive public outreach process. The unintended consequences include possible proliferation throughout the city. So if we started doing vertical deflection along this corridor, we might receive comments and recommendations to do it along a lot of other arterial corridors. So again, staff's recommendation would be against this option because we don't want to see proliferation of vertical deflection throughout the whole city. And then the unintended consequence, as mentioned, is the environmental impacts for noise and pollution. Next slide, John. Option number 6 was put in because we heard some suggestions from public input. And here's an existing picture of the pedestrian bridge within the city of Dana Point. And what's interesting about this project, besides how elaborate it is, and it's quite a gateway to their city, is the cost. One, this cost $6 million to put in, a little bit over, actually $6 million. And then the second thing, which I think is even more important, is the pedestrians really don't prefer to use a pedestrian bridge when it's inconvenient. There's an intersection that's a couple of 100 feet just to the north of this bridge, and the pedestrian use at the intersection is much higher than it is at this bridge. So the advantage is it does create a separated pathway from, separate from the vehicle traffic lanes. Next slide. The disadvantage is cost. It has a very low cost to benefit ratio. As I mentioned, that last bridge was over $6 million. Here's a pedestrian bridge that was is going over Avenida La Plata, which is in San Clemente. It actually connects San Juan Capistrano to San Clemente. That was a $192 million gap closure project. But in this case, you can see the pedestrian works a little bit better because it's already grade separated. Again, the disadvantages are the pedestrians prefer to use the quickest route and don't tend to use bridge crossings. And it's also difficult to conform with ADA. So if you don't have the natural grade separation, you'd have to put in an elevator, which is really expensive. Unintended consequence is you have high long-term maintenance costs to maintain the elevators. And even the bridge that's shown on this screen, within 2 years after completion, it started having concrete spalling problems. So there is some serious long-term maintenance concerns. So those are the 6 options which we presented. We realize that besides option number 1, the other 5 options carry a significant price range, ranging from $2 million to $12 million. With any significant change in the city's arterial infrastructure, the city would want to complete an extensive public input process to help steer the project to make sure it's addressing all the community concerns. Given the high costs and the needed easements for several of the alternatives, and the long timeline needed to address the public input process, staff is recommending option number 1, and also working with the Calavera Hills Safety Committee to address the signing recommendations which they made, and move forward with that option. Next slide. So in summary, staff's recommending to City Council regarding the traffic calming recommendations for option number 1, which is the speed feedback signs for College Boulevard. And next slide, John. The next steps, staff will include any of the commission's comments and recommendations in our subject City Council staff report. And the item is tentatively scheduled for the May 19th City Council agenda. And with that, I understand I presented a very concise overview of the 6 options, but we're available to answer any questions you have and elaborate and provide any information which you would request. Thank you.
Nathan, do you want to read that public comment now or after questions?
Now we're gonna go to public comments first, and then we'll ask our questions.
Okay. Yeah, so we have received one letter with written statement from the Calavera Hills Traffic Safety Group, which states as follows. We represent a group of residents, parents, and school crossing guards who are concerned about the safety of residents, especially children, who use College Boulevard to get to and from school. We live and work in the Calavera Hills neighborhood. We ask that you read this email into public comment for today's commission meeting. Thank you for a very detailed and thorough analysis of options to address our concerns. We appreciate staff's time to develop this report and your responsiveness. We have surveyed the Calavera Hills Traffic Safety Group membership for their feedback on the options presented and ask that they rank choice of their preferences. High speed on College Boulevard continues to be of significant concern. There was also some variety of response in the actual ranking, but overall agreement on the preferred options. So we included the respondents' top 3 preferences as a percentage. So here are those results. Option 1, 94% favored. Option 2, 81% favored. Option 3, 8% favored. Option 4, 43% favored. Option 5, 15% favored. And option 6, 25% favored. In addition to the surveyed responses, several residents pointed out that there should be a no right turn on red sign, like in the village, during peak hours at the intersection of Carlsbad Village Drive and College Boulevard. Students who live on the west side of College Boulevard frequently use this intersection to cross the street. Also, our crossing guard would like to know what could be done to improve the safety for children crossing College Boulevard from Tamarack South. Currently, there is no left turn or dedicated left turn signal for cars turning left onto College Boulevard North. The crossing guard is posted on the east side of College Boulevard at this intersection and frequently has to run into the street to prevent cars from turning left when children are in the crossing. Based on his direct experience, he's very concerned about this intersection. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard and for soliciting input from the residents who are most impacted and at risk. Please remember that for every decision you make on this commission, the moral and ethical choice is to prioritize human life and pedestrian safety over the needs and movement of automobiles. Also, by making our roads safer for pedestrians, we increase the likelihood that families will walk or bike rather than drive the short distance to school, thus reducing congestion, pollution, and the cost of road maintenance. We look forward to continuing to work with you to ensure the safety of all residents in this wonderful community. Sincerely, the Calavera Hills Traffic Safety Group.
Okay, thank you for the comments. I'm gonna go to question. We're gonna start with Commissioner Hunter.
No questions.
Okay, Commissioner Perez.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. This is just more of like some statements too that I have, but you know, for College Avenue or this area is very dynamic. Where in regards to the northern limits all the way down to Cannon, you know, we have multiple changes within the speed limit. So, and what I mean by that is that we have 2 schools, you know, adjacent to College, where it goes from during the school timing 25 miles per hour down to 45. But also too, you know, there's also congestion that we have to really take into consider. So, you know, my thing that I wanted to just point out is that, you know, with option 1, where we have this information of data being collected, you know, about speeding and things like that, I think we also have to realize too the behavioral part of this and also traffic behavior. And what I mean by that is, for instance, the North Tamarack versus South Tamarack corridor, between pickup times for kids at, I believe it's like 7:20, and also pickup times after school around 3 o'clock, that whole segment is completely jammed. And it's the problem that I see is that area is 2 lanes, and then you have a bike lane that's right next to Calavera Elementary School. The problem is that parents are pulling to the side and actually kind of parking and waiting in call to get to the pickup area from College and then turning into North Tamarack. And so you have a propensity of blocking the bike lane, and it just keeps on providing more traffic jam. So, that's one thing that I have concern about. Again, I'm all for, I'm not specific where the no right turn is on red, but you have to take that into consideration with that. I'm all for that. But the problem is that when you have that no right turn on red, it's going to start, we have to think, is this going to cause more and more traffic pushing up all the way down to like Carlsbad Village Drive? So, the thing for me that I just wanted to understand is, the data is great. If we can collect data, I think we need to also understand and if we can also try and figure out by visibility or anything like that, which I'm pretty sure we have, is to understand that behavior. Because the critical part for me that I see, and just looking at Google traffic, and I presented the commission and staff a really quick snapshot of what's going on. 8 o'clock in the morning is very congested, from Carlsbad Village Drive north of that, so North Tamarack, South Tamarack. But then 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, where it's pickup or ending of school, from Cannon all the way up to the northern limits on College, it's just completely, there's a lot of slowing down, a lot of traffic. So what I'm getting at is, I do feel that option 1 would be a great instrumentation to understand the data and what's driving this. But also too, I think we really also need to consider, understand the behavior parts of traffic that's going on College. So, and with that, that's all I have to say.
Okay. Commissioner Pincier.
Yeah, this one drew my attention, and so I presented something this morning before I saw the safety committee recommendations. And so I looked at each one of the options from the standpoint of not knowing what they were providing. But I think that I would defer to that safety committee, and if they desire option 1, then that's fine. I sort of see it as kicking the can down the road. I don't think it's going to solve the problem. As the staff pointed out, it's that some of the disadvantages there are that it's only likely to provide a limited and waning effect on the drivers. Option 2, I don't think I had enough information on it, but I thought it looked sort of like lipstick on a pig to take care of the issue, but leaving the traffic lights, which have their own issues with safety, especially when people run them at high speeds. I like both the roundabout options and came out of the closet on that with a lengthy explanation. And then options 5 and 6, I just don't think would solve the issues, and I think the neighborhood agreed. So rather than drag this out, I would just say that that I think supporting the what the Traffic Safety Committee has in that neighborhood is probably our best approach, and at least would buy us some time to consider other options if the speed feedback signs and the extra if that doesn't impact things, to allow more people to feel comfortable walking their kids to school or riding their bikes to school, maybe that solves itself. The other thing is maybe we're going to have a new normal after the COVID-19 crisis goes away. Are we going to go back to the same kind of driving pattern we had before, or are people going to work from home? They're going to, hey, this isn't bad. I can do this. I'd rather do it. So I guess that's all I have to say. I didn't really have any questions, but just comments on it.
Okay, sounds good, Commissioner Pincier. Commissioner Linke?
Thanks. Could I possibly go back to the slide with the locations of the collisions? So the yellow
Pins.
flags are the collisions, right?
Yes, the little push pins.
So to me, it looks like, am I echoing?
No.
You're okay.
To me, it looks like if you look at this, I assume the schools, the elementary and middle schools are towards the tops of those. And if you
That
look
is
at,
correct.
so if you look at 2016, there's a whole bunch of yellow flags like right in front of the school.
Four.
And in 2015, there's 2 of them are in front of the school. And in 2017, there's 2. In 2018, there's a bunch. So to me, I'm seeing a cluster right in front of the school, which is a concern. If anything, I would think the safety issues should probably focus on that, like the segment between the intersections with Tamarack, the north and south ones there look to be particularly intense. Anyway, I want to thank staff for providing all the options. That's great. And thank Mr. Kim for providing the extra data. I had requested, I think, the collision data and the extra data here on where the collisions happened is important. I had a question. You answered a couple of my questions already. One of my other questions was, is there any speed data available for this area of the street? So a common complaint from residents is that people are moving too fast, and I'm not always sure that the main solution is to just reduce speeds. We want to do that, but do we have any data on that here?
We don't currently conduct speed measurements outside of the speed survey, which is on file for this roadway. So we have an official speed survey, but it's geared more towards establishing a legal speed limit and not necessarily raw data. And that's why I think it's important to mention that the speed feedback signs would be a great way to collect the speed data. Currently, right now, we haven't assigned staff to go out there with the speed gun and measure speeds. This way, with the speed feedback signs, we would be collecting it at will, 24 hours a day, beyond what staff could do. Currently, we would be constrained by just the willingness or staff availability of somebody standing out there with a radar gun.
Okay.
So,
And so you have speed feedback signs in other areas, and it's my understanding that, and I guess they're not connected up to the central command center, but have you collected data in Carlsbad with those speed feedback signs where you leave them off for the first period and then you turn them on? And do we have like real world experience, real world data in Carlsbad of how effective those speed feedback signs are at actually reducing speeds, like initially when they're turned on versus maybe 6 months later?
we don't have any official numbers, but based on my looking at, we do this most regularly on residential streets. Our residential traffic calming program, the first step is to put a portable speed feedback sign. We put it in dark mode for a week to let it record vehicles. And then we use that speed to determine whether or not the street qualifies for phase 2. And then we turn it on and then let the speed feedback sign show speeds to vehicles that pass by. Based on me looking at that data, it seems to ping pong, not very consistently, but anywhere from a couple miles per hour reduction to maybe 10, which doesn't sound significant, but 10 mile per hour reduction, even a 5 mile per hour reduction is enough to possibly lower the speed limit, which I consider pretty significant. And again, I think the portable speed feedback signs that we've used in the past, they're small, they're not very noticeable because the size, the portable, the permanent ones that we're proposing are much bigger, and they tend to be noticed more by motorists. But we don't have any concrete numbers that I could give to you in terms of effectiveness.
Okay, so I visited the area one morning, same time that our staff liaison, Mr. Schmidt, did, and visited with the crossing guard who was cited in the safety report. And I'm wondering, I just wanted to end by showing the intersection. Is it possible that I could share my screen just to give people an idea of what they're talking about? So can people see that?
Yes.
Okay, so the two red arrows are pointing at those two schools, and then the red circle here, sorry, you might not be able to see what I'm doing. So then I'm showing the intersection with Tamarack to the north, Tamarack to the south, and then Carlsbad Village Drive towards the bottom. Now if I focus in on the south intersection with Tamarack, so the crossing guard stands where that red dot is, and I stood with him there during the morning rush hour. And I took a couple of pictures, one noted by the arrows, one looking west and one looking south. And this is the one looking west across College and then up Tamarack. So what he does is when he sees kids walking down sort of the hill of the Tamarack sidewalk there, he'll anticipate them arriving and then push the button, the pedestrian button, so that it's on when they get there. And then when it turns green and they start walking out, then he runs out to that spot. And what he's doing there is he's trying that long line of cars coming eastbound on Tamarack are turning left. So he's then protecting those kids, alerting those drivers. And so that's one of their main concerns there, just so that people can picture what they're talking about. This is some signs that I've seen around where it's no right turn on red, but it's limited to just when the pedestrian button is pushed. And I'll ask a question about that in a minute. But then this is the other picture looking south. And there were a few bicyclists that were coming northbound there. And so another one of his concerns is there's a lot of right turning cars, not right in that picture, but in conflict with the bicyclists there. So I think the real focus of this particular crossing guard is these left turns off of Tamarack, but you can see how many cars are lining up. And so as Commissioner Perez said earlier, the traffic is super heavy, so this is a really complicated problem. And I'm not sure the speed feedback signs, they might reduce speeds by a few miles per hour, but if the real concern here is the intersections, I don't know if there's anything more that we can do with the intersections. So I'll turn off my sharing. So I guess the question that I had was, have we explored using those, or as the right turn on red limitation, is that being explored as one of those types of signs where it's only active when there's a pedestrian there?
Yes, exactly. That's one of the options that we're looking at is how to implement if we do consider a right turn only. Maybe we can implement it during certain periods of time to have like what you showed, a blackout sign that would only be operable maybe during certain times of the day. But we also have a concern that that restriction will be at a time when traffic is probably heaviest, and may result in these queues getting even longer, because now we're telling people whether there's no pedestrian or not, you can't turn right. So that's why it needs to be looked at. And instead of just saying yes to the residents, and that's all. I wanted to kind of clarify that the safety group is not an official committee or commission. It's a group of concerned parents. And I think there's about maybe 20 signatures or 20 names that are attached. So just keep that in mind. It's not like an official group that's been assigned to represent an area. It's a group of concerned parents. And we meet with whichever group, whether it's one person or 20, we're more than happy. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that we're looking at, Commissioner Linke, is whether or not no right turn on red could be effective, and if we could restrict the time, would it make it more feasible? But then we still have concerns because we obviously want to do that when there's school pedestrians, and yet that's the time when traffic impacts to such a sign would probably be the most severe.
Right, I understand. So I'll conclude, I guess, by saying the cluster of collisions I saw in front of the school are a concern to me. I'm not sure that I understand the residents feel that speed is a factor, and it probably is. And I support the speed feedback signs. I'm just not sure that as I think other commissioners have mentioned, would be sufficient to take care of the problem. But at least as a first step, and since that's the most popular with that unofficial group, I'm comfortable supporting that. And also, I think collecting before and after data with the speed feedback signs would be important to see. And so we have some real data on, are these effective in the city of Carlsbad? Like I said, I've seen reports where in some cases it's only 1 mile per hour or 3 miles per hour, or it goes down 5 miles per hour, but then 3 months later, everybody is numb to them and they're back driving the way they were before. So if we had some real world data for Carlsbad, that would be excellent. And if we can explore any other approaches to those intersections, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I want to follow up again. I think Commissioner Linke pointed out a good graphic about the left turns. And that's something we've looked at before. The side streets aren't currently wide enough to accommodate a left turn only lane. But based on the options that we presented, maybe that's something that we could take a look at and maybe fine tune our options to look at specifically if that's one of the big concerns of parents crossing the street, is simply that when you get a green ball, you have to watch out for the pedestrians when you turn left. If we could provide some sort of signal recommendation there,
Right.
it would cost money, but we could look at it.
I also wanted to add on that it, as you mentioned earlier, it's really a balancing act, and that graphic which you showed, which showed the pedestrian crossing guard, showed that that's a perfect use for a pedestrian crossing guard, because a person standing there with the paddle telling traffic to stop is more effective than a red arrow telling them to go or stop. So that's a great graphic, and it's always a balancing act what we look at, because if we did implement a protected left, that then affects the efficiency of that intersection for 24/7. And really the key issues that we're looking at is when schools in session are letting out, and that's right when the peak period is, and that's where we really have to balance pedestrian safety with the operation of the intersection. So it's definitely a balancing act.
Right. I want to give a quick shout out to that crossing guard who was clearly very experienced. And I would say that behind the scenes, we're working with staff on the sustainable mobility plan, and safe routes to schools is one of the things in that. And I think talking, at least at some of the schools, to the crossing guards, because they really know exactly how traffic runs and how to keep the kids safe. So thank you.
Great comments and questions and suggestions. We're gonna go.
Chair Goken, can I just jump in really quickly here? Commissioner Linke, could you please forward your pictures, the graphics that you had? Could you forward them to Ms. Paiva or Chair Goken, just in case we get a Public Records Act request, so that can all be part of the record? Generally, if we were under normal conditions, we would distribute copies of those kind of materials to the public in case they wanted to examine it. We're on Zoom now. Everyone got to see it. So I just want to make sure that we're covering all of our bases in the event of a Public Records Act request.
I appreciate that. I'll forward that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Fowler, do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, I do. So in the, I think it was the first slide, there was actually the first bullet point of the first slide was that College was built to major arterial standards per the circulation element of the previous general plan. But I assume you're not suggesting somehow that was an error, that in fact, if it were built today, I know there's no, it's not equivalent, but you would not build something less than an arterial, right? That's not a mistake.
You want to start, John?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was just
no,
asking if Mr. Kim wanted to start with the comments.
Yeah, no, it's not a mistake, and I think it was important to point out that when the original general plan was developed, it was a guide to how to build the city, and College Boulevard was built the way that the people that created the general plan envisioned, and I wanted to point that out, that it was built to a certain standard. Since then, the circulation element has been modified to give flexibility to city engineering staff to consider usage. Now that the streets are built, here's a new mobility element that allows the city to evaluate complete streets techniques to enhance mobility in other modes, because when that general plan was the previous general plan, it was in all honesty more geared towards automobile travel, and pedestrian, bicycle, transit was more of a second thought. So I don't think the mobility element tells us to rip out all the streets in Carlsbad and build them to a new standard. It gives us flexibility to consider with the Traffic and Mobility Commission's input, with City Council's direction, what types of flexibility we want to impart on these streets. And staff is trying to use the mobility element in our experience to craft our options.
It seems to me that though that what the solutions are trying not to say, but in fact are kind of trying to do, is to make it not an arterial anymore by road diets or what have you. And so my observation then is, well, wait a second, you're taking this arterial, making it something else, and it's no longer part of the network, or it's creating this thing that reduces capacity, let's say. And so then the question of that is, well, is that what we really intended? Is that fine? I mean, it might be fine if cities normally do that. Is that the case here where, well, and in fact, when it was approved, were the schools penciled in there? Because I think those schools are relatively new, right?
So just to add a few comments, as John mentioned, the roadway was built under the prior general plan, which was much more auto-centric, and unfortunately, that's the way 95% of all California streets were built. So now we're stuck. We have an existing infrastructure that was built primarily for auto-centric focused, and when you evaluate what changes you'd want to make, any revision is going to be very, very costly. And then on top of that, every person has a different opinion on where the focus should be. By surveys, it shows that most people are now more open to looking at complete streets, which is a focus on all the users of the roadway. So to answer your question, would we build the roadway the same way? Probably not. We'd probably look at moving cars and vehicles and goods as efficiently as possible, but we know that you also want to move pedestrians going to school, along with bicyclists and other mobility users like skateboards and anything else that transports people and goods. So what an arterial may look like is, you look at the efficiency of intersection control, you might have redesigned intersections with signals with just a tighter configuration. If the community supports it, you might have roundabouts. You've heard the virtues of roundabouts, and they're much more efficient. The statistics show they have great safety improvements and great safety statistics. But along a corridor like that, you'd probably see a community design a separated Class 1 bike and ped facility. And originally, Caltrans was specifying that those are around 10 feet with 2 feet on each side. But now communities are building them even wider. You can see really popular pedestrian venues like along the coastline, and communities that are building big open areas for all the users are greatly seeing the demand and great use from the public. So just something to consider. 25 years ago, there really wasn't complete streets, and there wasn't the focus on all, moving all of the users of the roadway. Now we do have an updated general plan and a mobility element that focuses on that. The challenge for us is to find out where the best use of the community dollar is, and where's the highest needs. So I just wanted to add those comments.
And I do see your point, Commissioner Fowler. When the mobility element came into play, they did not change the designation of College Boulevard. They could have, but it was built as an arterial, and when the new mobility came out, it was labeled as an arterial. And as such, it had a primary responsibility of carrying vehicles still in this current mobility element. So I understand what you're saying, and I think it's valid. But we were specifically asked by council to provide options regardless of consequence of what we could possibly do. And what we did was we reached into the option of possibly changing or updating the general plan, and stated that in our staff report that these.
And by the way, I don't want to be accused of favoring my automobile over somebody's child. That's not where I'm talking about here. I'm just trying to understand consequences of things.
Yeah, we're not gonna do it.
I'm sorry?
We're not gonna accuse you of that.
You wouldn't. That's not who I'm worried about. Mr. Frank, when you talked about, you said something pretty interesting, but I don't think I heard it right, or maybe I did hear it right. You said that you were talking about the effects of the 78.5 interchange. And in fact, that's not going to be built, certainly not in my lifetime, I wouldn't think. But you said that after the COVID, whenever that ends, which may not be in my lifetime either, but you said, I think you said, the problem won't be as great then. Is that what you said, or did you not say that and I just misheard you?
No, that's not what I was intending to say. I was saying that the traffic pressures would remain because that infrastructure improvement's not scheduled to be improved.
Okay.
So once the demand returns, we'll still have similar pressures along that corridor.
Yeah. And one thing that has not been discussed, which I'm slightly surprised, that what would be we would have to consider also the consequence of completing college, right? Because if you restrict or put college on a road diet up there, and all of a sudden college gets completed from El Camino Real, then you would think that there would be somewhat more demand, or is that not an assumption? There are more cars.
Yeah, so like I mentioned during my slides, every adjustment to an arterial corridor has impacts and consequences. So there would be an adjustment of traffic patterns. So we would, if council elects to do a city-led project, one of the first steps would be to evaluate what we want that arterial segment to look like.
Okay, so yeah, we haven't really thought about that consequence. I mean, are there any studies about speculations about what the increase?
Well, there's the study that was presented, part of the
Yeah.
LMFC 15 report, but yeah, we probably want to revisit the plans that were developed were part of were presented by a developer, and that was at an earlier time, and we'd really want to revisit what we want that corridor segment to look like.
And in fact, I think.
Best serve the community needs.
Yeah, okay. And I think you want to add a lane on now you got me. Anyway, that's all right. So I've got a question about the speed data. And you said something interesting, which is the speed data that you collect to evaluate the, let's say, viability of the current speed limit is buried in some algorithm, and the raw speed data somehow gets lost or not available. I'm actually curious, though, that what would happen if you actually did a speed study and it showed that the speed limit actually, people were actually charging up the hill or charging down the hill or whatever. And you saw, and it actually turned out that the people were driving faster. And wouldn't that require increasing the speed limit regardless of anything else?
Yeah, and so that's why I said that the speed surveys that we conduct are specifically to the purpose of establishing a speed limit, and that's a different purpose than just figuring out when the speeding occurs. There's guidelines, there's recommendations in the MUTCD and the California Vehicle Code on what a speed survey to establish a speed limit, what that looks like. And that's different than when we would collect data from the speed feedback sign. For example, it says that you should conduct to support a speed limit, you should conduct the speed survey off-peak during the weekday. Whereas for a speeding application, I may want to just know when that speeding occurs. If it's late at night, so be it. That's where I want to know. So the reasons for collecting the data are different. We only use an official speed survey to support the speed limits. If we collect data, we don't call that a speed survey necessarily. It's just speed data, because it's not to the requirements found in the California Vehicle Code to support a speed limit. So they're kind of two different things, but it is curious if one would contradict the other. Yeah.
Yeah. So in essence, if it turned at midnight that people use it as a drag strip, that might not be captured with your survey, but you certainly want to know about that.
Right. Yeah. So the official speed survey wouldn't have that information, but our speed data that we could collect from the speed feedback signs would certainly have that data.
Okay, can you go to your option 2 slide?
Okay, let me share. Option 2 slide. Can you see that?
Yes. So redesign with a lower design speed. So what street are you're talking? There's an intersection here, and so I assume that you are redesigning it for the lower speed, and it happens to be College Boulevard.
That's correct. Right.
Okay. All right. And then finally, the speed cushion. If you drive down PCH or whatever it's called in Encinitas, there is a speed, which I take as its full length is like PCH is an arterial, right? I mean, I'm not confused about that.
Correct.
It's right. And that does have a speed cushion somewhere in Cardiff, or maybe a little south of that.
It's
And
actually in the northern segment.
Yeah. And you know, what's so funny is I hate those things. And one of the, I think, objections is now everybody will want a speed cushion in their arterial or whatever that was. And yet I've driven over it a few times and, you know, it does, you know, I think of all of, except for option one, I think that's probably the thing, and especially if it were near the top, which presumably you want in like in the early afternoon, not at 6 or 4 or when school lets out, that might slow people kind of towards the top, you know, if you put it up there. But that's just an observation, because I hate these things for that very reason that people say, hey, I want one in front of my house because I want one in front of my house for whatever reason, including to slow the traffic. But, and so I was, you know, interested to see how it would work, but it's really not that bad. So, but the truth is that I think this is changing for better or for worse an arterial into something else. And I think that regardless of no matter what option you have with regard to that, you know, you're going to run into worse and collateral problems. So that's just my thought. So I do like option one. And I've thought, why wouldn't there be a red arrow at Tamarack? And you explained it, that, you know, it'd screw up for the rest of it. Now, I suppose you couldn't shut it off, you know, or something like that, or make it green all the time, or reprogram it so that it acted efficiently for the rest of the time other than the high volume times or anything like that. That's not in the capability of programming a traffic light.
There's certain options that only exist with the traffic signals. One option is what's called a protected permissive, and as a part of John's evaluation, he'll evaluate the alternatives to see if it would work. But at this time, the crossing guard is actually, I think, the most effective safety improvement for that crosswalk.
Okay, in consideration of time, Commissioner Fowler, do you have any more questions? Because we have to move on and we have a last item that's quite long. Okay, Vice Chair Johnson, do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you for the presentation, and I do support option one, and I do like the idea of looking into the right turn only, or no right turn on a red. That's good. Just because we looked at the rapid flashing beacons, is that a possibility to add or help the situation around schools? I'm not sure, but I'm just asking the question.
Commonly not. The RFBs are for uncontrolled locations, and at all of our signalized locations, we have much more firmer control in a traffic signal. You actually have a pedestrian indication, so the RFBs would not be appropriate to use in that situation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, my comments are, I support option one. I feel that this is the faster way that we can take action. Also, we need to take in consideration that when these roads were built, they were not built for people driving their kids to school. The schools were built for buses. So we have all this extra traffic around schools just because, and unfortunately, if we have accidents and everything else, it's because of that extra traffic that when the roads were built and the schools were built, they were not built for thousands of cars to come in and out every morning. And as Commissioner Pensier mentioned, I feel that it's going to be a big change, the new normal. Because of the 6 feet distance, the schools might not have all the students go in at once. So then we're going to have half the cars in the morning, half the cars in the afternoon, and so on. So I feel that the faster thing that we can do is go with option 1, and then that gives a chance for the staff to collect more data on the speed and everything else to hopefully come up with a better solution if it's still needed at that time. So with that said, do I have?
I got a question.
Okay, Commissioner Hunter.
Just a couple quickie. John, when did we do the survey for the speed, and what was the 85th percentile when we did it? Do you remember?
I have it in front of me.
Hey,
The speed survey date was October 30th of 2018.
okay, pretty close.
And
Schools were there.
the 85th percentile was 48 miles per hour.
Yeah, I figured it'd be fast.
And it was based on 100 vehicles, sampling of 100 vehicles.
Cool. And then just to follow up, we're still an auto-centric city, and it doesn't matter what we do. That was the biggest complaint was traffic in the city. So, and hopefully we'll get a little change with the COVID. I'm done, Mona. You can jump to your emotions if you want.
Okay, well, why don't you make a motion so you have the floor?
I'd like to make a motion that we support the staff's proposal for moving forward with option 1.
Can we also add that we recommend that they collect speed survey data and revisit this in the future?
I am happy to add that to the motion.
All right, I'll second.
I'm actually, we're providing some, can I just interject a comment hopefully before you vote on that?
Sure.
We're providing semi-annual updates, biannual updates to your commission and to council. So if at your leisure, if we could present that information, you know, as we get it without bringing back a separate item, like a separate staff report, that's the way I'd like to move forward, and it just trying to operate as efficient as possible.
Yeah, that motion didn't have any time frame or staff report required. So just collecting the data and revisiting it. So if you're doing it on your, you know.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, please note that Commissioner Hunter made a motion to support staff's recommendation with additional of revisiting the item and collect speed data, and Commissioner Linke seconded. Can we go for a vote?
Yes. Commissioner Perez,
Yay.
Commissioner Linke,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Pensiers,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Chair Johnson, Vice Chair Johnson,
You're muted again, Johnny.
Yes.
Chair Gokin.
Yes. Please note that it passed unanimously.